The best full slate of the entire season is finally upon us because we have week one data to react to. We've got some notes on different teams and what they want to do. We kind of know what teams are looking to do for this year as well, but also we have people who may overreact to some stuff, who may underreact to other stuff, and hopefully if we are grounded, if we use a good process, if we kind of know what we're looking for, we can make the right decisions and exploit all the stuff that we saw in week number one, making week number two the best full slate of the entire year. Let's dive on in, break it down, and get you set for the week two main slate. Welcome on into the Heat Check Fantasy Podcast, powered by numberFire. That's right here on the FanDuel Podcast Network and numberFire.com. My name is Jim Sonis. I am a senior writer and analyst for numberFire.com. Joined here, as always, by Brandon Gadula. He is the managing editor for numberFire.com. Brandon, week two is here. How are you doing today?
I'm great. Anybody who knows me knows I love to react to things. So when I get to overreact, I mean, just imagine that. Like it's just, I'm just in my glory here.
But week two is the best. You agree, right? Full slate.
Yeah, I'm glad you added in that caveat because you.
No, you're right. You're right. Slate. Also, I'm not gonna lie. I didn't like the reasons we had a lot of 2-game slates last year because mostly due to like COVID postponements. But like those 2-game slates, I loved. So correct, full slate, the best full slate of the year.
Yeah, because we saw guys who converted on their opportunities last week, and then their salaries basically went up. And some guys who had opportunities and didn't convert, their salaries are back down. And then like by week 7, the salaries don't seem to change as much whenever someone just had like one bad game because the sample has been built up. So I think that this is just that week where you can look at something like an expected fantasy points model. They're kind of out there. I've tweeted some stuff about it with receiving so far. Maybe I'll come up with something else. But you just basically look at like who overperformed and should we chase them and why? And actually that'll be part of one of my trends that we go over for this week.
Our trends this week will still be pretty process based. You'll be talking about quarterbacks and the way that they're rostered. I'll be looking at close games and why we want to load up on close games and be wary of the larger spreads, which we do have a couple of this week. I'll be talking about big games, specifically from wide receivers. And then I'll be talking about the value of pass catching at running back. So a lot to break down for today. We'll get into all that in just one second. But first, a lot of you on Twitter asked about last year's listener league. We had a listener league last year that we were running where you could go to a link that we'd say in the podcast, enter in. It was a great contest. So there was no rake. And because of your interest and because you made your voices heard, it's back. The Listener League is back for this week for the week 2 main slate. If you want to enter, go to FanDuel.com/league/listener league. That's FanDuel.com/league/listener league. It is a $5 entry with 3 entries max. There is no rake. So again, you're not paying anything to FanDuel. FanDuel's probably going to lose money on this contest. You will gain money if you do well. So $5 entry, 3 entries max. Go take FanDuel's money. FanDuel.com/league/listener league for that. Let's start things off here with the slate overview, Brandon. And the key takeaways, the key things for you going to this slate are what?
Narrowing down the games that I want to build my actual stacks around. In week 2, in week 1, it obviously for me always feels like, well, we don't know things, so I want to make sure I'm not too heavy in certain buckets, and I'm trying to play for every different angle. For week 2, you can kind of feel a little bit the same way, but for different reasons, where it's like I don't want to make sure that I'm so far off of either consensus or that I'm maybe someone who had a receiving role didn't convert is actually terrible now, like a Julio Jones, and then I'm like, am I going to stick my neck out there to this degree? So basically kind of just reaffirming what I think is most likely to happen, not just what happened in week 1, but moving forward. And then also, and this is just part of every single week, is for me that moving forward, it's kind of new in my process, is really, really, really narrowing down those games that I actually want to have heavy exposure to.
Yeah, I think for me, it's all about 2 buckets. The buckets are players who are under salary based on the role they had in week 1. So Najee Harris, guys like that. And then, like you said, loading up on the games that we project to shoot out. And I think that there are some hyper logical games on this week's slate. And I would say the most logical games for stacking are all in the late slate. So don't tilt early. I'm telling this to myself. We do new notes to future me on the Monday podcast. I'm doing one now. Don't tilt the early slate because the games I want to stack are pretty much all late outside of maybe some minor exceptions early on. So we're going to talk about those games, how we want to stack them. But to me, finding players who are under salary based on their role, loading up on them and loading up on those games. And the best part is the convergence between those two. I would say Mike Williams fits in that department where he is both under salary based on his role and in one of those games. Also, Chris Carson to an extent as well in that Seattle game. So if you can find the convergence of those two, that makes for a pretty good situation that you want to take advantage of. Let's take a look at some injuries here heading into week number 2. The big one was Raheem Mostert. He had surgery on his knee. It is now done for the year. We talked about Elijah Mitchell a bit on Monday. Let's talk about him again now, and we'll talk about his broader role in the trend section. But just generally, what's your feeling on this backfield entering week 2?
So this is one of those where Elijah Mitchell at 5,800 on FanDuel, probably going to be more popular than he deserves to be. I know he had that long touchdown run, the 19 carries. We talked about no targets for him. We talked about this on Monday. He ran 10 pass routes, which is fine. They didn't throw a ton, but Jermichael Hasty was involved in that angle as well. Trey Sermon was not active last week, so they basically played the whole game with no Mostert, but they're adding Trey Sermon back in. You never know how that's going to go. And honestly, I'm always historically wary on the 49ers backfield anyway, because they split things up. So I think that we can find much worse process plays than Eli Mitchell. I think that's how he must prefer to go, because that's where I'm starting to see him more and more. But we can also find a lot better process plays too.
Yeah, I think that he is someone to whom I'm okay having exposure, but he will not be a core play for me because I don't project him to be this big pass catcher from out of the backfield. I do worry about the Trey Sermon situation, so I would bet if you made me guess right now whether I'll be over or underweight on him, I would guess I'll probably be under for reasons we'll discuss in the section later on. The other big injury for this week is Odell Beckham. The Browns have already ruled him out. We saw Donovan Peoples-Jones and Jarvis Landry play a bunch in week number 1. Jarv did well. DPJ didn't do a whole lot. Anthony Schwartz also got 5 targets with 3 deep while running limited routes. Big spread for this game, 12.5 points, which always makes me pretty nervous, but it is a great matchup. So which Browns interest you most with Odell out for the second consecutive game?
Yeah, the spread here is one of the reasons I haven't dug into this game as much as I have some others. I do see Anthony Schwartz limited at practice on Wednesday, which is notable. He is listed with a knee.
I think that if you can sniff the practice field Wednesday, it doesn't matter. Like if you can physically smell the grass, I'm not going to care.
Okay. Well, I was just going to say, I mean, what he does is speed. I started off the wrong way with that, but I
feel like that might get him suspended if he's just
yeah. But he's fast, and if he is already injured and he ran limited routes last week, this is probably a perfect example of Brandon of 3 years ago would be like, yeah, give me all that Anthony Schwartz. All it takes is one deep target. He's so fast. That's not my process anymore. So I'm probably not going to chase Schwartz, even at his $4,800 salary, just because this game spread. So you probably have a better feel for the Browns than I do. So I'm gonna let you list off who you're looking at first, and then I'll let you know where I'm thinking from there.
Yeah, if I'm going to allocate a lot of salary to this game, I need it to be, or if I'm going to allocate a lot of salary to a wide receiver, I need it to be a game that I'm willing to stack. Mm-hmm. Probably not going to stack this game, even though it is a Tyrod Taylor revenge game, which means to me, I'm looking to save salary if I do want to go here, which means Donovan Peoples-Jones at $5,000. I think he's enticing, did run a lot of routes in week 1, didn't get that usage, but we heard a lot about him during training camp. So he's only $200 more than Schwartz. So I think that DPJ is probably the place I'd be looking to go most. But like Jarv is $6,800. Nick Chubb has a high floor, great floor, but he's $8,400. Not going to catch passes. Did lose some goal line work again to Kareem Hunt last week. I think the floor is amazing. I'd rather go elsewhere for the ceiling for Nick Chubb. I think that's kind of the thing that I look at there. So like the one Brown I'm like most interested in is Donovan Peoples-Jones. I'd also note that they're offensive line pretty banged up. Jedrick Wills missed practice Wednesday. He might play because they said he's day to day, but their backup tackle was also out of practice. JC Treader was out of practice, so keep that in mind. But I think that DPJ is kind of the one Brown I feel really good about, just because, like, again, if you're new to NFL DFS, stacking tight games, for us at least, is critical. It's kind of similar to like NBA, where you just want to load up on tight games that are going to be contested the entire time. I'd say it's actually maybe even more important than NBA. I don't know. Maybe I'm bad at NBA, so what am I talking about? But like,
probably not, just because it's pretty rare for an NFL game to get to the point where all the starters come out for like the entire fourth quarter. You can see that in the NBA.
But like they drain clock and stuff like that. So
same thing. Point being, you want tight spreads.
Correct. And we'll talk about that later on as well. But I think it's limited Browns me this week. How are you handling Nick Chubb?
Yeah, so with Nick Chubb, this is something we talk about a lot with specifically Chubb and Derrick Henry, and their paths to destroying you for not using them is multiple touchdowns and basically like 150 plus rushing yards. They're not going to get you the Christian McCaffrey like 90, 100 yard receiving game with like 8 catches. It's not, and that's going to add up. So he's got to score twice. I can envision it now. I think I envision this more with Nick Chubb than anyone else, where he's just like on the 10 and then like just walks a touchdown into like. You
envision it because it's happened thousands of times.
Yeah. So I always have that fear of missing out on Nick Chubb, but he's probably one of the most likely guys to get you 20 in a given week, but I don't know how often he's ever even gotten to like 30, just because
he didn't all of last year. He didn't top 25.8 the entirety of last year.
So like, yeah, I mean, if he were in the 7,000 range, it'd be one discussion because 25 points at like 7,500 is different than at 8,400.
So I think he's similar to Elijah Mitchell, where I'm okay having some. He will not be a core play for me, and I will very, very likely be underweight on Chubb relative to the field. Josh Jacobs did not practice Wednesday. He was banged up the entirety of Monday. Like, you could see that he was just kind of like doubled over. So I assume he's going to play, but he's not fully healthy. Where are you at on this backfield? Let's assume that Jacobs plays. That seems to be very, very likely. I guess you could talk about Kareem or Kenyon Drake just in case he doesn't go, but I think he's going to play, just not fully healthy, it seems.
Yeah, so Jacobs had those 2 rushing touchdowns, just the 2 targets, and he's another one we can probably throw in the bucket where you and I don't really like Josh Jacobs in DFS that much, even at 6,500. He played on that Monday night game, so already banged up, played in that overtime game. The whole team, I think the expectations are down. If I'm not mistaken, that total is trended down like 3 points since I saw it. I think I saw it at 49 and then at 46. I don't know where it is now, but I'm not that high on Josh Jacobs ever, and I'm not going to get there for this week. And then Kenyon Drake is 5,500. I think there would still be better plays.
Yeah, I agree. So that's the injuries. We'll talk about the big games to stack in the bookmaker section in just one second. But first, speaking of bookmakers, hey, football fans, FanDuel is giving you the opportunity to bet on the second week of the NFL season. All you have to do is go to FanDuel Sportsbook and opt in to the contest. Place a 3+ leg parlay wager with cash on any week 2 NFL game. And if your bet loses, get a refund in store credit. Site credit? Max refund is $10. Bet on week 2 of the NFL season with FanDuel. Head over to the FanDuel Sportsbook today and place a risk-free NFL parlay. Must be 21 plus and present in Arizona, Colorado, Iowa, Illinois, Indiana, Michigan, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Tennessee, Virginia, or West Virginia. New users only. Max refund $10. See full terms at sportsbook.fanduel.com. Gambling problem? I gotta recalibrate my brain because I haven't had Arizona in this one yet. But anyway, in Arizona, call 1-800-NEXT-STEP. Call 1-800-522-4700 in Colorado. In Iowa, 1-800-BETS-OFF. In Indiana, 1-800-9-WITH-IT. For confidential help in Michigan, 1-800-270-7117. In New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Illinois, and Virginia, call 1-800-GAMBLER. In Tennessee, call the Red Line at 1-800-889-9789. Or in West Virginia, 1-800-GAMBLER.net. And welcome to you, Arizona, part of the FanDuel Sportsbook family now as well. Let's take a look at what the bookmakers are saying about this week, specifically focusing in on the key game stacks for week number 2. The highest total on the slate is for the Chargers and the Cowboys. That's a 55.5 with the Chargers favored by 3.5 after the DeMarcus Lawrence injury yesterday. Yeah, 3.5 right now. It opened at 52, but apparently the over got blasted to the moon. And it makes sense because both these teams rank inside the top 6 in projected offensive efficiency based on my numbers this week. So, Brandon, are you as high in this game as the bookmakers? And how are you looking to stack it? You are on mute. Welcome back.
Yeah. I muted myself because I was drinking coffee, and then I have like 700 tabs open. So
never mute.
Yeah.
As I drink my coffee while not muted.
So yes, I'm as high on this game as the bookmakers, and all the ways is how I'm looking to stack it. I think that's about it. I think this would probably constitute as a Gary Oldman game, as Al Zeidenfeld or Al Smizzle would call it back in the day. I'm sure he still does, but it's when you play them all.
Okay.
Just play them all.
He would also say play all the dudes, and I think that is an appropriate phrase for this week.
Yeah. So I have this game 4th in combined pace, which adjusts for context. So I like to see that anytime that pops up. I think it's easily the game of the week, and this is probably part of, and I will try not to like hammer home like, guys, check out my new process for the year, but this is like a perfect example of a game that we know we should want to stack. Now, you can feel like it's going to be chalky, so you cross it off, but I think that's not smart for reasons we'll talk about in just a second. But there are so many ways to stack this game that you can be different from the field. But there are also so many ways to stack this game that you can stack this game and still be wrong if it does hit. So, in past years, for example, I might have been like, well, I'm going to get my Justin Herbert, Mike Williams stack to save some salary there, run it back with either Amari Cooper or CeeDee Lamb. Lamb's $1,000 cheaper with his salary on FanDuel. And then maybe I'll kind of just rotate in, a few other guys, but then I'm missing out on 2 guys who had like not the best roles, but still pretty solid roles, like understated roles in Austin Eckler and Ezekiel Elliott. Everyone's panicking on Zeke. He almost scored that touchdown, and I understand that, yeah, he should have probably made a move and scored. But if you're looking at that, like, that's the problem with island games and watching too much tape, I think sometimes is that'll stick in your mind. Like, he doesn't have it anymore. He played 82% of the snaps. This is a game we want access to. Austin Eckler, he didn't get any targets. Well, he ran a ton of pass routes, just didn't get targeted, and had 7 red zone carries. So we could be sitting here saying
5 inside the 10-yard line, 4 or 5 inside the 10-yard line. That's like more than he's had in his career, I'm sure. Don't fact check that, please. But like,
so like we could be looking at, Austin Eckler. Well, he's going to catch passes, but he's not going to be involved in the red zone. It's like now we get him involved in the red zone, but he didn't get targeted on his, I think, 24 routes, which isn't like it's not getting me excited. But you don't want to like go to the most obvious places, the 2 undersalaried receivers with Mike Williams and CeeDee Lamb. There are a ton of other ways to kind of load up on this game. So I really am trying to stack it virtually every way, including both quarterbacks.
I am somewhere strange on FanShare Sports. It's only the defense is popping. Sorry, I was really confused. I'm going to figure this out. Anyway, I do think that this game is a one where you can take advantage of overreactions, specifically, like you said, with Zeke and Eckler. And I think that is a way that I want to go this week. I mean, if I am trying to just like maximize my expected outcome from this game, Mike Williams, amazing. CeeDee Lamb, amazing. Jared Cook, undersalaried, I think. All these guys are great, but I do think that we can, like you said, stack it while still being unique via Eckler and via Zeke. I think Eckler is my preferred between the two because he's $7,000. I think that the defensive matchup worries me a bit less. I feel better about him getting targets this week than Zeke, even though, again, it was skewed. He didn't have any last week. I love the goal line usage. I love the offensive line with our guy, Rashawn Slater, moving bodies out there. Go Cats. So I think that this is a really good game to stack where you can stack it without being chalky. And that's always really fun. It's the best game to stack on the board, I would say. I think Dak is 1 or 2 in terms of quarterback for this week. He's going to be a core play for sure. The one downside is that the Cowboys do have no La'el Collins this week. There's no Michael Gallup. So there are some injuries on the offensive side of the ball, but I think we saw the Cowboys play really well against a great defense last week. They had Collins there, but they didn't have Gallup for the second half, and they played well there specifically. So I think that, to me, it's a situation where you can stack it straight up, but you can also stack it in ways that are kind of fun. I don't think Eckler is going to get all that popular this week just because, didn't get those targets. People may overreact. There are shiny objects both below him and above him in terms of salary. So I think Eckler is like a standout type tournament play for this week.
Yeah, and I mean, so like if you've played DFS a lot or you're like a super, super big contrarian play, what we just said is going to be like, these guys are so chalky. But literally, like, you can get access to this. Like, certain guys in this game will be very popular. That's true. But you also have nine players to roster on FanDuel. You can get unique with different combinations. You don't have to play everyone under like 5% roster rate like that. You don't have to do that. You can still get access to these big games, and you can do it differently. So that's something that I'm really trying to focus on early this year.
Absolutely. Second highest total this week is the Seahawks and the Titans in Seattle. Total is 53.5. Seahawks favored by 4.5 now. That line has moved a bit in the Titans' favor. Obviously, the Seahawks played well in week one. Super run heavy, which is kind of annoying, but they still did the ball. They played well. The Titans sucked. How are you viewing this game? Yeah. Do those things worry you, that the Seahawks being run heavy and the Titans sucking, or is it wheels up on everybody in this game as well?
They do worry me, but not enough to downgrade this type of game and put it in I don't know.
It's not New Orleans.
I was just gonna say, it's not like you're putting it in that tier or anything. So you can downgrade it a bit. Now, this game I do have 9th in expected pace, but also dead last on the main slate in expected pass rate, which shouldn't really surprise anyone. But so here's kind of the issue with me and Russell Wilson all the time, is that Russ can like destroy a slate by being really efficient, but if he's not incredibly efficient, the volume won't necessarily be there, and you can kind of have like a 250-yard day and 2 touchdowns instead of the 4 he had in week one. I think he had 4. So that is a concern for me, but I still think that this is a game. This is my number 2 game probably on the slate, which is not, again, going to shock anybody. But again, there are ways that you can stack this one and be a bit different. Chris Carson is a name that you mentioned already, 6,700 this week. He's not going to be someone who's super popular. Now, he is kind of also in that like Nick Chubb bucket for me historically, where I don't feel like he's really going to burn me, but he did play 77% of the snaps, had 18 routes and 3 targets. I like to see that.
Rashad Penny's out.
Yeah. Rashad, my guy.
Yeah.
Although that's kind of an evergreen statement. Unfortunately, it's not funny, but I mean, so I can talk about the guys I love, but I'm gonna defer to you here so you can name the best stacks, and then I'll follow up with what I hear.
So with regarding like the run rate and the Titans being bad, like I want to start putting things in like a scale of 1 to 5, like red flags. Like, because again, like for me, it's like something like in my brain that pings, like, oh, there's a red flag there. There's this thing that could go wrong.
I would say DEFCON system where DEFCON 1 is the worst.
No, this is 5 is the worst. No, okay. It's way too confusing. 5 is the worst. I would say I'm at 1 red flag out of 5 on this game. If it were just the Seahawks pass rate or just the Titans being bad, it'd be a half red flag. It's 1.
So make it a 10. Make it a scale of 10, and then you can have 1 through 10. You don't have to worry about half.
1 through 10 is way too. It's chuggy, bro. I think that's the word that the Zoomers are using. So no, come on, just stop being a boomer.
Make it 1 through 7.5, or 1 through like
No, it's in my rules. It's a 1 red flag out of 5. Stop fighting back. I think that's not low enough for me to be too low. It's low enough where I'll put it below Cowboys Chargers, but I probably would have had it below there anyway. So to me, I still think that Russ is a player I'd like to have as like, if I'm picking 4 quarterbacks this week, we're talking Dak, Herbert, Kyler, Russ. Fine. I think that works. And I think that Russ would probably be in the top 4, maybe 5th. I think that's the way I grade that. I do think that Carson is super intriguing, given that There were times where he lost snaps in high leverage situations. So losing snaps in third down, losing snaps in the red zone, but most of those snaps are lost to Rashad Penny, who is not going to play this week. So I think Carson $6,700 makes a lot of sense. I think that Metcalf and Lockett are egregiously undersalaried relative to their talent. So even though they may not get a lot of volume, they don't need a lot of volume to beast out because they're so freaking good. So and they also get a large percentage of the targets on that team. So I think that looks pretty good. I do have a hard time deciding about the Titans guys, but I feel like the easy route to go is just go AJ Brown. He was limited in practice Wednesday, but like limited for him is good on a Wednesday. He's usually out. So I would say Carson and AJ Brown stacks be like my default, but this is a game where I want to hit the combinations.
Yeah. I mean, and to do that, you have to build a lot of lineups dedicated to this. This is another one of those games where you can be like, well, I got my Russ Metcalf because he didn't erupt as much and is actually at a lower salary than Tyler Lockett, and then you bring it back with whoever else. But I think there are just too many ways that you can go. You can basically build a lot of your lineups this week centered on these top two games, and you still probably you won't get access to every combination. And there's also it's important to say you can't account in tournaments for every possible combination of things that happen. But in two games, you have a better chance of doing that if you're focused on those two. So I think I'm in on Julio. I know that I'm in on Julio. He's one of my player loves. I'll talk more about him in detail, but I want to throw it out there with Derrick Henry. What are your thoughts here? Keeping in mind that Thanksgiving it's not post Thanksgiving yet for Derrick Henry.
I would say that he is someone I'd like to include in those combinations. I think the question is he's below AJ Brown, but I feel like you could justify putting him above Julio just because Henry we know has those disgusting upside. So I feel like we can still go there. He actually had 3 or 4 targets last week, and his workload may have gotten diminished later in the game because they were down by so much. So I do think that Henry, like if you gave me one tournament team and asked me, would you rather go Nick Chubb or Derrick Henry? I'd say Derrick Henry. I think that Henry is in the more competitive game and more likely to potentially get targets down the stretch too.
Yeah, 13 routes for him, 4 targets. That's pretty solid for Derrick Henry. So someone again, you could stack this game with like 1 or 2 lineups, and then you're not getting Derrick Henry. And then if Derrick Henry scores twice, it's not going to surprise anybody.
Yeah. So I think that he's pretty interesting there. Let's move now stay out west, I guess, and talk about the Cardinals and Vikings. Total for that game is 51. Cardinals favored by, actually, I think it's 3.5 now. Yeah, 3.5, totals 50.5. So the total's gone down a half point, but the spread is tightened by a point, which we always will take. The one downside here is the Cardinals are getting kind of buzzy. The initial look ahead line was the Cardinals minus 1.5, reopened at 3.5, then went to 4.5, now back to 3.5. So a lot of interest in the game, it seems from a betting perspective. I think the one reason that I'm still kind of worried, despite the movement towards the Vikings recently, is I think the Cardinals defense could be pretty good, and the Vikings still not like looking great thus far. They look kind of weird, I would say. Weird is the word I'd use to them in week number 1. I don't think Darisaw is going to play yet. Seems like he's probably working his way up still. So how are you viewing this game between the Cardinals and the Vikings?
I like this one as well. So we're kind of expanding that list of games that I want to stack. And again, like just think about if you're and say, okay, maybe you don't build like 150 lineups or you build 20, you can stack the top 2 games. But then if you stack one of those games with this game, like you're still really concentrated, but you're getting exposure to a lot of those games that can shoot out. So that's something that I'm just trying to be more focused on. This game, honestly, might rate out a little better for me than the game we just talked about in terms of once you factor in pace and pass rate and things like that. So it's in that conversation is the Chargers game is very clearly the one. So this is probably like the 2B at worst for the week. Now we know to play Kyler if we can get to him. I'm not going to waste a whole lot there. And same for DeAndre Hopkins. The issues start to come in though with like who else. Chase Edmonds played about 60% of the snaps. Christian Kirk had that eruption game, and I've chased Christian Kirk plenty in the past, and it has not really benefited me too much. Rondale Moore, I think, will be a little bit buzzy, to use a word that you just used, but keep in mind that he did get 5 targets, but it was on 14 pass routes. So his path to 18 FanDuel points or so, which is kind of what you need from a receiver for like GPP winning upside, it's still really low. And then on the flip side, like you can, so with Kirk Cousins, he's someone that we talk about sometimes with like never play him, and it took him 49 pass attempts, 351 yards, and 2 touchdowns to get to 22 FanDuel points. Like overtime game, 350 yards, multiple touchdowns, and it still didn't matter. It's going to be
against a worse defense.
Like maybe once a year you'll really kick yourself for not playing Kirk Cousins because
I don't think I'll ever kick myself.
So it's just a part of our process too. With if anyone's wondering why, like, hey, Kirk Cousins in this shootout, he kind of had that last week through almost 50 times and just got to 22 FanDuel points. He's not going to run the ball, so he's not really on the slate, like on the menu for us. Kyler,
Dak, or Kirk? Wait, sorry, not Kirk. Herbert. Oof. Sorry, Justin. My bad, bud.
Like straight up or at salary?
At salary.
Dak, Herbert, Kyler.
You have Kyler last?
Yes, because I don't think we have quite well. So
I think we do.
Outside of Najee Harris,
Mike Williams, Jared Cook.
Yeah,
I mean maybe Jared Cook, Anthony Ferguson, I think is in play. Tyler Conklin's in play.
Okay. So you give me those like the 2v2s, and I'm actually gonna throw some of these at you with tight end when I'm talking Darren Waller. So Kyler Murray and Anthony Ferguson.
Okay.
So Ferguson is 47. So then I could add, if I go down to Dak and add 700, that's 5,400 for tight end. That gets me back up to Jared Cook. I'm
going to use Dak anyway, so I don't know if this is a proper one. But
it's yeah. So if I go Herbert second, that'd be an extra 400. So then I'm up at
Higbee, Dallas Goedert or rather vomit.
Higbee, Fant, Gronk, Pitts.
I think Kyler.
I'll be able to get to Kyle Pitts.
Because like Kyler, I don't have any concerns. There are zero red flags. There's a half red flag for Dak because he's facing a really good defense and doesn't have Lyle Collins.
Okay, fine.
Go Kyler. Kyler's the best quarterback in this slate. As far as the non-DeAndre Hopkins guys, I used Chase Edmonds last week under the hope that he would get like an Austin Eckler type role where he would get creative passing game usage. He would, he wouldn't get the goal line stuff. And he did to an extent. He had 43 receiving yards, 63 rushing. So he had 100 yards from scrimmage, and that was the worst game script possible for him. But it's not, I think that I'm less inclined to take a chance on a role when I have data, and the data says it's just kind of fine. So I would say Edmonds, I probably won't get there. I think that Kirk is fine. I'm not he won't be a non-game stack guy for me because there are guys I feel better about in his range. I also don't know what his salary is. He is $5,600. He's the same as Mike Williams. Mike Williams is way better. So for non-game stacks, probably no Christian Kirk. For Rondale Moore, I know the snaps were bad, but AJ Green looked pretty rough. And he still had 5 targets, 2 deep, 1 in the red zone. And it seems like they wanted the ball in his hands. So
then play him more than 4. Then don't play AJ Green 30 routes. Don't give AJ Green 30 routes and give Rondale Moore 14.
And I don't trust Cliff Kingsbury. So I'm not assuming he will increase Rondale Moore's role, but I think that there is credence to saying, at some point talent may win. I'm not going to assume that for a cash game. I would not even give Rondale Moore an ounce of consideration.
No.
For tournament game stacks, there is a path to him having a good game. Therefore, I could consider him there. He will not be a focal point for even the game stacks, but for a couple, I think that there is a path to a good game there.
Yeah, I'm just trying to weed out those 2% rostered guys for me. Not rostered as in slate, but my exposure.
So let me think. Sorry. talking over
No,
you, my bad.
no, you're
But
good.
for a wide receiver, the checklist for them to make a perfect lineup is 85 yards or 2 touchdowns. Moore had 68 yards in week 1, despite that limited usage, because he was getting like good targets and he's a talented football player. So again, non-game stacks, no, but I think there is enough there where I can justify using him in game stacks.
Yeah, I'm not going to argue that,
Yeah.
but if Rondale Moore goes out and plays again half as many or runs half as many routes as AJ Green, maybe gets those 5 targets again, but catches 2 or 3 of them instead of the 4, like you're basically kind of torching that lineup in a sense.
Right, but like that's true for anything.
Yes, but
so
you
like
also know.
I'm not focused on floor. I'm focused on do they have path to a ceiling? And I think he does.
Sure, but to me right now, Rondale Moore's ceiling is maximizing the efficiency on half the workload or half the opportunities as AJ Green. And
So you're
that's
saying
scary.
you'd rather use AJ Green than Rondale Moore?
That is not what I'm saying. I'm saying I would rather
Okay,
use.
I thought that was actually what you're
receivers.
saying, so I wanted to make sure.
No, I would rather use other receivers than Rondale Moore, even when I'm stacking this game.
Okay.
So Rondale Moore 2 touchdowns is a lock at this point.
Rondale Moore, Christian Kirk. I assume Kirk, right?
Kirk.
I agree. As far as the Vikings guys go, love Justin Jefferson off of a down week last week. Adam Thielen, 3 touchdowns incoming. With Dalvin Cook, it's an ideal script for him. Slight underdog situation where the Vikings may need to pass, which gets him more passing game volume, which I love. I know we want the have your favorite running back, but like good passing environment, good game environment. I think that Dalvin is tremendous for tournaments once again this week. What are your thoughts on the Vikings?
Yeah, love them. And I won't, even though I love them, I won't be using Kirk Cousins. Sorry, we got Christian Kirk here. We just had the Justin Herbert. So I'm like really kind of walking on eggshells to talk about Kirk Cousins. But Jefferson at a lower salary than Adam Thielen, I'll take all day. Dalvin's my number 1 love at running back this week. And then KJ Osborne.
Yeah.
46.
I was going to ask you Osborne or Rondale Moore, because I think that's probably KJ Osborne, right?
He ran 87% of the routes. Like that's at least a little bit more enticing. Now, I'm not going to say that he would get more targets than Rondale Moore even, but you're basically just you're locking yourself into an efficient game for Rondale Moore if he's going to just be kind of an afterthought, and he's going to have to get those. So it's probably still Rondale Moore, just betting on like talent, but KJ Osborne is someone I would consider at almost minimum salary.
Yeah, I would too.
Just because of the routes being so
he's
good.
Running the Irv Smith role, basically. I know that Irv Smith is not a wide receiver, but he's kind of a wide receiver. He's KJ Osborne from a usage perspective is kind of in the Irv Smith role, more so than Tyler Conklin. I think that Conklin is a consideration because tight end's terrible, but like I would say Osborne's in that role. 9 targets last week. He had 1 deep target. He didn't get a lot of downfield work, but like, he has some speed, stuff like that. So I'm fine with it. I think that Osborne's at least an option for this week. Let's move now to the trends discussion. This is where we get more process based and talk about the way we do things from a process perspective for NFL DFS, because a lot of you may be playing DFS for the first time, but it's also good if you're new to the podcast, like why do they talk about game stacks so much, or why do they not care about quarterback popularity, things like that. So Brandon, your first trend is talking about quarterback roster percentages and what it means for DFS.
Yeah, I mean, even for myself, I need to learn. Like, there's always more you can learn, and always more you can remember, because you probably heard some of this stuff, but then forgot about it. But I think we should talk about quarterback popularity rates, just because like you and I again don't particularly care about them too much. That's why we're talking about the chalky quarterbacks and not thinking is Kyler going to be too chalky. So the reason stepping back. The reason people talk about popularity, in case you are like kind of brand new or still trying to wrap your head around why that matters. If a quarterback is rostered by 30% of teams in a tournament that you're in, and he just tanks, or, God forbid, gets injured early on, you're basically taking out 30% of the lineups if you don't use him. So you gain instant leverage on the field in that situation. Now, that logic applies like across positions, and the logic behind it is correct. The issue is that quarterbacks don't get that popular on full 12, 13 game slates. They just don't. Across all regular season main slates last year, only the guy that we already talked about, Kyler Murray, cracked a 30% roster rate on FanDuel. He was at 30.6% in week 3 after he put up 29.2 FanDuel points per game in the first 2 weeks. And among 400,
a below average game for him is what you're saying.
Yeah.
Because he's the quarterback one this week.
Yeah. Lock that in. 35 FanDuel points for Kyler.
At least
incoming
minimum.
But among 409 quarterbacks on main slates with at least 10 pass attempts, only 24, so under 6% of those guys were on at least 15% of rosters. So you're not getting a whole lot of guys, maybe 1 to 2 on even 15% of rosters on FanDuel. Around 13% of them had a double-digit roster rate. Now, is like blindly rostering the week's most popular quarterback something you should seek to do and actively try to do and guess who's going to be the most popular so that you can play him? No, that's absolutely not. Now, is rostering a quarterback at 5% better game theory wise than rostering a quarterback at 15%? Yes, that's still a better play. And Jim and I would say that all day, every day. But the odds that a quarterback ends up being substantially rostered, like 20, 25, 30%, super low. It's also the most predictable position that we have in DFS. And so you can you can also find other ways to get different with your whole lineup. Like you can stack him with guys that aren't the most obvious. You can also just play lower rostered guys at different positions to make that whole lineup unique. So I think it's just important to get that out of the way in week 2 that we're not going to care about how popular quarterbacks are. So if I was ranking the importance of gauging popularity so I can try to avoid, the potential landmines, the way that I would rank the positions are receiver because it's super volatile, tight end, but sometimes tight ends are chalky because the tight ends just have a pulse that week and have decent salaries. Defense, which I don't really think about that much anyway, which is probably a flaw in my process anyway. Running back. Same. And then quarterback is dead last. So how would you follow up this? Could you rank, how quarterback stacks up with you in terms of how much you care about popularity?
Literally don't care a quarterback or running back. That's probably stupid, but I don't care. They're very predictable positions, stuff like that. So unless it's like bad chalk, which we will get, like I was pleasantly surprised with the public in that Sam Darnold was not super popular last week. I thought he would be, and he wasn't. So kudos to everyone for not using Sam Darnold. And the process there would not have been super, sound. So quarterback and running back, don't care. I would say wide receiver is probably 1 for me as well. Tight end is probably 2, and defense number 3. Defense is harder for me to avoid the chalk because sometimes I need to use, like if it's a lower salaried one, I will say in general that people tend to roster high salary defenses, which is kind of weird. But so I don't really feel the need to, sometimes I just need to, save the salary. For quarterback specifically, the reason that I am not super inclined to avoid it is because it's such a process-oriented position. Last year, there was only 1 quarterback in a perfect lineup with a total under 48 for that game. So like that already whittles down the pool so much, I can't afford to like look at everyone. So if I am crossing off half the slate at least already, at some point I've got to use someone. So I think that I'm okay. Like you said, you can deviate elsewhere, find stuff like that. I'm okay rostering a quarterback I expect to be chalky unless I think that they're bad chalk. And that does happen. We do see that happen. Didn't happen too much last year. In general, the chalk is pretty good at every position last year. But I think at quarterback, I'm not going to worry too much. Or at running back, doesn't really bother me too much there.
Yeah, and I mean, last week, the 3 quarterbacks who were on 10% of rosters in the Sunday Million, and you can find this information every Monday morning on numberFire.
Oh wow, I've heard of that place. Good reviews.
Patrick Mahomes was 12.5%. He put up 33.28 FanDuel points. Kyler Murray 10.5% rostered, 34.56, and Jalen Hurts 10.21% rostered, 28.76. So there are going to be weeks where the the chalky quarterbacks don't really kind of work out. Josh Allen he was 4th in popularity, didn't have a great game. Aaron Rodgers 5th, but these guys were sub 10% anyway. You just don't see like the need to differ. And you can look last week, the argument against this with running back, because you and I both said we don't really care. The 2 most popular running backs last week in the Sunday Million were James Robinson and Raheem Mostert, who combined for 8.9 FanDuel points. So if you avoid those guys, yes, you're in a great spot, but the odds that these guys really bust at running back, it's going to take an injury, or honestly, James Robinson shouldn't have been the most popular running back last week anyway.
Accurate. The bust rate of low salary backs specifically is very low. So I don't avoid running backs just because they're chalky. Because like if they're going to get volume, they're going to get volume. Sometimes I'll naturally like avoid it just because like sometimes there's bad chalk. Like I think Nick Chubb's probably pretty popular this week. I'm okay being lower on that, but I'm not actively actively looking to avoid it. Let's talk about spreads for this week, because we've actually got some wider spreads in this week's slate. So we're talking about how that influences things. And I think that for me, the key is to sell out to stack tight games. Overall, last year, half of all NFL games had a spread of less than 5 points. So 4.5 or less. That's the baseline. Those 50% of games produced 64% of all game stacks in perfect FanDuel lineups. A perfect FanDuel lineup is the best lineup you could have constructed under the salary cap for that week. Only 4% of all game stacks came from games with a spread of 10 plus points. I think it was actually one. It was the Chiefs and the Panthers, that game that they played. I think that was the only one the entire year with a spread of 10 plus points that resulted in players from both sides being in the perfect lineup. That is despite 12.1% of all games having a spread of 10 plus points. And that kind of makes sense because you need both sides to come through to justify stacking it. And I think that it should lower the value of the Bucs and Browns offenses. They're both heavily favored. It might be tough to game stack those games. The negatives with heavily favored guys do translate to running backs as well. Hello, Mr. Chubb. Only 5% of perfect lineup running backs came from teams that were favored by double digits. That is lower than the league-wide rate of 6%. So they were actually less likely to be in the perfect lineup than they were just as a baseline. Despite this, those players are almost always chalky because 13% of all popular running backs in the Sunday Million last year were favored by 10 plus points. So again, Nick Chubb's floor is amazing. We should have questions about his ceiling though. And the public usage rate of players on teams heavily favored was higher than the perfect lineup rate for every position, including defense and special teams. It is pretty scary to be low on these good teams like Tampa Bay, like Cleveland, et cetera, but I'm fine with it because historically, might not burn me. How are you viewing the games with the heavy spread this week? So talking about Cleveland's offense, talking about Tampa Bay, and then in turn, Atlanta and Houston.
Well, I'm really glad that you added those baselines because I think sometimes analysis doesn't get into that with how many games actually had a spread of under 5 points. So again, to reiterate what Jim said, 50% of games fell within that, but 64% of the game stacks came within those games. So that's what you want to see. So for me this week, ask me about Tampa Bay and Cleveland. Well, I'll go with Cleveland first because we already talked about them. Probably not going to play a whole lot of Cleveland Browns. Peoples-Jones might be first for me just because of that salary, but then also rostering a heavily favored receiver, which, leads will come not from just running the ball, but I'm not that high on him to begin with. It's probably minimal exposure to the Browns. For the Bucs, this feels like a game where they could erupt again, but it's going to be a lot of. They're going to spread the ball out. Antonio Brown is going to he's going to run fewer routes than like Mike Evans and Chris Godwin, but he's going to be as involved as those guys anyway. Still a little bit scary, but I'm kind of down to like Brown. Mike Evans fits the high ADOT receiver at home narrative that you like, but I'm probably not there just because he can get erased from that offense so frequently.
I also do like that more for lower salaried explosive guys. If I'm trying to like find a lower salary guy with upside, like with juice, Donovan Peoples-Jones actually didn't realize that. He checks that pretty well, but that's that.
Evans is 6,700. Now, normally I would be all in on that, but I think for me, I'm going to go with Antonio Brown pretty easily over him at 6,400. and Godwin's what, 8,000. So it's probably gonna be like Antonio Brown, maybe some Gronk if I need to vary things at tight end.
It matters less at tight end. So I think that does
Yeah.
lend itself towards Gronk. Ran a ton of routes on Thursday night, got
Mhm.
good usage. So I think Gronk is fine. It's just more so running it back, or if I'm using a wide receiver, that to me implies I can use a guy in the opposing team unless they're super low salary. That's why, I much respect and adoration for Brandon Cooks. I don't want to go there this week. Calvin Ridley is amazing. Could do well this week. Probably not going to get there. Kyle Pitts, I think, is in play. He's like the one guy from Atlanta or Houston I do want to go to. But I think just overall knowing that the public overinvests in heavy spreads is a good thing because, like you said, we can find ways to deviate elsewhere at quarterback. We need to worry about spreads or about popularity there. This is how you deviate. You load up on the tighter games. So all three of Tennessee, Seattle, Dallas, Los Angeles, and Minnesota, Arizona have spreads of less than 5 points right now. So I think that those are the games we want to focus on more so than loading up in Tampa Bay, loading up on Cleveland, because yes, the floors are great, but are they gonna make you regret not using them? Potentially, but the odds that are lower than one of those blow up games.
Yeah, I mean, I would be more in on Calvin Ridley if he wasn't still 7,700. That's kind of hard to get to. But probably
If he
some
had
mini
Justin Fields
stacks.
as his quarterback instead of Matt Ryan.
Yeah. But I mean, I could foresee myself having like Calvin Ridley and Antonio Brown mini stacks or like Gronk just to kind of get some correlation there, but that's about it.
Yeah, I think that's where I'm at too. So Pitts is fine, not writing, and Gronk is fine, not writing them off, but other pieces in those games are scarier to me, and Donovan Peoples-Jones as well. Let's move to your second trend, talking about receivers who blow up, because we did see some big performances last week out of wide receivers. We saw Deebo Samuel go nuts. We saw decent game out of Corey Davis. I don't know why I picked him out of all the people I could have discussed. Adam Thielen had a big game last week. We saw big games from wide receivers. You're talking about what happens the week after for those wide receivers. What did you see when you dove into the data?
Yes, I mean, there's like a very fine line between reacting to good situations and like good workloads and good receivers who convert and can put up big games and just chasing points. And I think that especially happens more than any other position at wide receiver whenever someone goes off for like a long touchdown or gets to 100 yards, scores, and gets to like 15 FanDuel points. I think people take note. So I wanted to look at some following week data on receivers after they had a good outing the prior week, and I just set that baseline at 15 FanDuel points. So my sample here is receivers who, one, played on a main slate, two, scored at least 15 FanDuel points on that main slate, and then three were on the main slate again the following week, just because island games a little bit different, and also I just had this data handy, so either way. The initial week, so their big game in this sample, their average salary was 6,350 on FanDuel. They averaged 20.6 FanDuel points. They were drafted on 8.3% of rosters on average. I know it's not the best look at it but this is just kind of looking at overall samples and not individual cases. The next week, those numbers were 6,630 in terms of salary, so about a $300 increase on average across this whole sample. And I think like 10 guys had their salaries drop, and most of them were by just $100, so probably matchup based. They averaged 10.7 FanDuel points, so about half of what they averaged in their big games, which I know is not like a fair comparison, but that's kind of what we're getting on average. And then their draft rate went up to about 10% on average, so about a 2-point boost over a fairly large sample here. So that's a little bit concerning. Now, 43 of these receivers put up another 15-point FanDuel game, so that's 28%. But among receivers with at least a 2% draft rate on all main slates, the 15-point average, so 30% of basically relevant receivers got to 15 FanDuel points. The guys who did it last week did it at a slightly lower rate. So it's not to say like there's no chance these guys do it again, but they're a little bit lower in terms of their odds to get there, and their popularity and salary on average goes up. So am I going to be crossing off receivers who had good games last week? No, of course not. That's silly. Will I be trying to prioritize players who had down games, but have good matchups, had good data, like peripheral data, routes, targets, things like that, you bet. I've tried my best to predict big games for receivers, and it's like impossible. I know we're gonna have like that fear of missing out on guys who erupted last week, but don't overreact too much to what we saw just 1 week prior. That especially applies to week 1, but this is also something that will apply throughout the season as well. So, Jim, what's kind of your process whenever you see a receiver convert on his end zone target, put like maybe a big catch as well, and that kind of fear of he's going to do it again. So, what's your thoughts here?
Yeah, so I've looked at bust rates of different positions each of the past couple of years, and if you look back to last year, wide receivers who busted at high roster rates in the FanDuel Sunday Million averaged 20 FanDuel points the week before. Wide receivers who hit averaged 16 the week before. Basically, backing up what you said, people chase the chalk or people chase big performances, and it doesn't work out very well. So I think that my process is to ignore what happened the previous week. Like, just ignore it. And if they're a good play, they're a good play, and I'll take it. If they're not a good play, easy to go away. So I think that it just kind of depends on what my process is. I think the other application of this is thinking about teammates in good situations. Last week, Jamar Chase went crazy. He was awesome. Looked really good. And I think that I don't mind that game from a mini stack perspective this week. And I might be inclined to go at the Bengals against a secondary that had a lot of communication issues last week. Why wouldn't I just go T. Higgins instead? Because T. Higgins is $500 more. T. Higgins also had good usage. He left for an IV at one point, but still ran a ton of routes. He kind of touchdown, but didn't get as much buzz as Jamar Chase did. So I think it's applicable there too. Finding receivers who may not have done as much. The Jefferson versus Thielen thing, not as applicable because I don't think people will chase Thielen. I think the people, rightly so, prefer Jefferson, which they should. So I don't think it applies as much there, but I think it's also applicable within teammates. Like, I'm going at that situation. Maybe I should go with the guy with similar usage who didn't pop off, didn't get as much buzz the week before.
Yeah. Again, none of this is to say, I need to clarify this. You don't just cross off the guys who had big games. But they're going to be a little bit less likely to have those outlier games. Just barely. Some of these guys are the best receivers because this sample does include elite receivers who can post 15 FanDuel points and because they have great workloads. But for me, I'm really trying to be better of not copying and pasting last week's because a lot of big games come down to they're similar like workloads at receiver, but some guys are going to have like a 95% catch rate and 100% catch rate on their targets that could lead to touchdowns. That's not going to happen every week. So some guys had the same exact workloads, but just different results. So that's kind of what I'm eyeing up this week.
I think a good example of what you said of, we're not going to cross them off. We just want to make sure they're in a good situation. Deebo Samuel is in a good situation this week. He had amazing usage last week. He's $6,900. I am still okay using him despite the fact he blew up. I just want to make sure I'm not using him because he blew up. And I'm not. I'm using him because he had good usage. He's in a good game. I think that makes sense. My second trend is talking about pass catching at running back because we are leaning heavily on perfect lineups here. At least I am. And those are flawed. But you do want to roster players who can make the perfect lineup. Otherwise, what is the point? If you are admitting I'm not going to fill out the perfect lineup, what are you doing? Like, what's going on here? At running back, most of those guys in perfect lineups catch passes. Last year, 42 running backs made a perfect lineup. 35 of them, 83%, had multiple receptions. In 2019, it was 40 out of 45 running backs with multiple receptions. That's 89%. In 2018, 84% of perfect running backs had multiple receptions. So basically, 85% of running backs in perfect lineups were pass catchers. In last year's group, they averaged 3.7 receptions for 32 yards per game. So that means in general, we should favor pass catching backs. That is the top line takeaway here. You want pass catchers at running back, even on a half PPR site. But obviously, 15% is a non-zero number. So we should touch on what it takes to make a perfect lineup without catching passes. Your Derrick Henrys, your Nick Chubbs, et cetera, et cetera. If we combine the past 3 years worth of perfect lineups, we have a sample of 19 running backs who made it with less than 2 receptions. Those guys averaged 152 rushing yards and 2 touchdowns on the ground that day. Those are massive totals. Only 3 of the 19 running backs had a single touchdown, just 1 touchdown. only 5 out of 19 had less than 120 rushing yards. So I think that I mentioned before at wide receiver, I want a guy who can get 85 yards or 2 touchdowns. A similar checklist at running back, if a guy's not catching passes, is he needs to get to 120 yards and a touchdown or get to 90 yards and 2 touchdowns. If that's our criteria, only one guy has served as an exception the past 3 years. That was, I think, Jordan Wilkins. He did it. He was the one guy who didn't check both those boxes, or one of those 2 boxes. So if you're considering a guy who doesn't project to catch passes, can he get me 120 yards or 90 yards and 2 scores? If the answer is no, it's okay to gloss over them. If yes, you can consider them. But if they project to be popular, they need a massive day to burn you for not using them. I think that's kind of the key takeaway here too. And that's a comfort if you're trying to be underweight on the projected chalk. So the big guy here is obviously Elijah Mitchell, who had no targets on 10 routes run. Let's talk about him specifically, Brandon. How are you handling him at $5,800?
Yeah, he's the name that came to mind. Tougher matchup too, obviously. That and if you look at like season-long rankings for like the expectations, which I think are probably fairly handy for estimating some things about the slate upcoming, but he's kind of listed as like the RB like 28. So consensus doesn't seem to be super high on him. Of course, that includes like all 16 games, not just the 13, but it was a little bit lower than I expected. I figured he would be getting a little bit more of that buzz. But for me, you've taught me well enough by now not to chase guys who have basically one path to production, and that path being just rushing. Especially, again, he's going into a more difficult matchup this week. And I hadn't really given this much thought, but he had a really long touchdown run. And he ended up with 104 yards. So I don't know what he did on those other carries. I kind of just took it at face value that he had a really, really strong game. But it just hit me that, he had that long run and only ended up with 104 yards on 19 carries. So
let me look up his success rate quick.
Okay.
His success rate was 42%. So not bad. About average.
Not too bad. Yeah. So like, he's going to be good salary savings. I think the real question is, would you play him in a cash game for the floor?
Absolutely.
And
not.
I wouldn't.
No,
I wouldn't.
No, I think his floor is bad because he doesn't catch passes. That's the weird thing about catching passes is true. Not only is it good for floor, it's also good for upside. Like it's kind of like strikeouts in baseball. We talk about strikeouts in terms of ceiling, but like it's points. You get points. I want points, and he doesn't get points without catching passes. I don't know if I've made that obvious enough. I want points.
Is that Chip Kelly?
No, I want points. Just give me points. That's all I ask. So for cash games, wouldn't touch him. Just get up to Najee. Like if you want to save some salary, Darrell Henderson should play a lot of snaps, $6,400. I know it's a tougher spot. We don't know what Sony Michel's workload will trend towards, et cetera, et cetera. Chris Carson, Austin Eckler. Austin Eckler is actually probably pretty good cash game play. Maybe I should be higher on him there. I would not touch him for cash games. No.
Yeah, I think Eckler right now is one of my 3 cash game running backs at this moment.
Yeah. Beat me by like 1 point in our head-to-head last week.
Not even. It was like 0.6.
It was a 3v3. It wound up being. We had six overlaps. I'm still annoyed about it. So I don't know.
It should be a little bit different.
Najee's going to be in. I'm just telling you that now. That's the same thing as last week. He was a given. He's a given again this week. So
yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I think that the same again, to reiterate with Elijah Mitchell, it's fine to use him in tournaments because that in that offense, he can have 120 yards and a touchdown. Like that's possible. He almost did it last week. But what are the odds of that? It's okay to be underweight.
And quickly, what would you say to someone who's like, well, his salary's only $5,800. So if he gets me like 14 FanDuel points, that's actually good. Like, what would you say to that?
You need 20. You need 20. Okay. It's always 20.
Okay.
Like you need 20.
Yeah.
Old Jim would be fine with 14 points. New Jim, no. 14 is stupid. I want points. Just gonna keep saying that. That's the takeaway for this podcast. I want points. There we go. Let's move now to weather for this week. There is at least a chance of rain in Jacksonville for the Jags and the Broncos. I don't care much. I know.
Can't use this game now.
Oh man, terrible. I don't care much about rain unless it's like a heavy rain like we had for the Browns games at times last year, but check back on that one later on. Winds in Miami are at 11 miles per hour for the Bills and Dolphins. As we touched on last week, that's not a massive concern at 15 miles per hour, or at 11 miles per hour. 15 is where I start to get a little uncomfy and start to divest, but it is worth noting and checking back on later. Also, a slight chance of rain in Tampa Bay for the Bucs and the Falcons. Winds are low there too. Wouldn't worry about that as of right now. Rain seems most likely in Seattle for the Seahawks and the Titans. It looks light right now, and the winds are low. So as of right now, I don't care. I think it's fine. But check back on that one later on. Make sure the rain is not worse. Make sure the wind doesn't get worse. Otherwise, I think we're still good to go. Wheels up on the Seahawks and the Titans. Let's move now to our positional plays for week number 2. Starting off at quarterback, Brandon, who do you have there?
You talked me into Kyler number 1, but I have.
Did I?
Yeah.
That's never happened. Usually you don't listen to me. I'm impressed by this. Okay, go Kyler.
Well, I'm going to go with 2 guys in the same game. That's Dak Prescott and Justin Herbert. Dak at 8,000. I love this game. Had 403 yards last week on elevated volume, which, could happen again if this game is a true shootout. But ran 4 times, twice in the red zone. 11th in EPA per attempt, or expected points added per attempt in week 1. 1.7% sack rate on 58 dropbacks, which you like to see. I know their offensive line's not totally healthy, if I'm remembering right. I black out whenever we talk offensive line.
They're healthy. They're just suspended for not going to a drug test.
Okay. We have 2 very obvious stack candidates to pair with him in CeeDee Lamb and Amari Cooper. Could also possibly throw in Dalton Schultz. Mm-hmm. We didn't talk about Cedric Wilson, did we?
No. I feel like the bigger benefactor of no Michael Gallup is probably Dalton Schultz / Blake Jarwin. I don't think Cedric Wilson is a non-consideration because we've seen him produce. Mm-hmm. And I think that like the 85-yard threshold is something he can get to. But I think I feel better about the tight ends being difference makers.
Yeah, we have a lot of value at receiver, so yeah, probably don't need to get there. And my second love is Justin Herbert. It's just a dream game. It's basically what you would kind of draw up for a game you'd want to stack. Herbert last week at 337 yards, 8.2 yard ADOT, so about half yard deeper than the NFL average in week 1. 12th in expected points added per attempt against a good defense. Dallas obviously got nuked in week 1. Now, you have a long week of prep, which is a little bit scary, but that's kind of the only thing you can say bad about this game.
I think that's a good thing, because if I were concerned about one team keeping pace, it'd be Dallas, and that increases the odds they can keep up. So I actually think that's a positive. I don't know. That could be weird, but I think Herbert's good. I try not to roster quarterbacks who don't run too much anymore, but I think Herbert's, like for this week at least, the one exception to that. I think that he's definitely solid for sure. My first love is Kyler Murray, because I mentioned that I have some concerns the Vikings offense may collapse because they're a wild team right now. But we saw last week that Kyler can pay off even without that. He ran 5 times for 20 yards, and that's actually lower than you'd expect. That could go up this week. The Vikings defense, pretty leaky against the Bengals. I like the Cardinals more than the Bengals, and easily just stack them up with Nuke. And I think that with the salary savings we have at running back, at wide receiver this week, pretty easy to stack Kyler and Nuke, so I'd like to do so. My second love is Dak Prescott. Again, this year we're okay doubling up on talking about the same guys. Dak is a tough matchup, and I do respect the Chargers. I think that they'll do pretty well this year. Now that last week was only the 13th time ever that Joey Bosa and Derwin James had played together, which is absurd. So that I have high expectations for this defense, but it's also Dak. He had a tough matchup last week. Didn't matter. He averaged 0.25 passing net expected points per drop back. The team was willing to throw a ton, which I adored. Means that they're probably thinking, which is, I know that's like a low baseline to set, but they are using their brains, and I like people who use their brains. Dak ran 5 times, and 3 of those came in the red zone, and that's historically where Dak runs more. So even with no Gallup, with no Lyle Collins, I still think that Dak is up there this week. If I have one single entry tournament lineup, I'm probably going Dak. You have to pick one for a tournament. Who are you going with?
Probably Dak.
Okay.
Yeah.
Let's go to running back. Who do you have there?
I've got Dalvin Cook at 9,200, 34 adjusted opportunities, which is carries plus 2x your targets for running backs. I don't know if you mentioned that whenever you're talking about
Did not.
Okay. I know it was an overtime, but sure, we know Dalvin Cook is going to have a lot of work. Those are the third most adjusted opportunities among running backs. Very nice 69% snap rate, 45% route rate, 7 targets. I have this game 6th in expected pace, so it's at least kind of average for the slate. People might be a little bit scared after what Derrick Henry did in this matchup, but I'm not. My second love is Austin Eckler, so I do think he's going to be cash game consideration for me. Again, right now, I think these are the three running backs I would play in our head-to-head contest. So, spoiler alert there, but I don't think we're going to deviate at running back based on who the other guy has. But Eckler, I don't think people will be in as they should be in this game. 24 pass routes, so 49%. Is it worrisome he didn't get a target on those 24 routes? Yeah, maybe a little. Would it be more worrisome if he wasn't running routes and not getting targets? Absolutely. 59% of the snaps. And also was coming in last week with that hamstring injury. And so maybe he was a little bit more limited, but still had 7 red zone carries. So give me that for sure in a game that could score 60 total points. And then Najee Harris is the third at 6,100. I'll tell you this much. We're not going to get a running back with a 100% snap rate at 6,100 very often. 71% of the pass routes as well that he ran, 5th among running backs. Second slowest game on the board, which is a little bit worrisome. The total's down, but I'm not going to overthink this one with Najee.
How heavy are you going in tournaments with Najee?
I probably would. I think I'm capping like all running back exposure at like 50%, but I know you're going to say like 90% for yourself.
Well, I was going to say take that 50 and double it.
Yeah.
So maybe you underestimated. It's going to be close. Real close to 100. Real close. Like I will have some lineups where I stack Eckler and Zeke, and that makes it tough because like I'm using up 2 guys in the same game. But like as a baseline, I'm just going to have Najee. I know everyone else will, but I can block them. Also, I'll be overweight on him. I know I will. I don't care. So
the thing too is
45%. He will be under roster at 45%.
Yeah, I was going to say the thing too is he'll probably be like 35, 40%.
Yeah, so if I go 100, I've got 75% leverage. Or sorry, 65. Ooh, good math.
Even I know that's wrong.
Najee is my third love as well. Only thing that I would note too is that he had 57% of the team's red zone chances, so carries or targets inside the red zone. He had 67% inside the 10-yard line. He had 2 carries and 2 targets there, almost scored on one of those. I was desperately hoping for him to score to bail me out after last week went awry. Didn't happen, but I think this week he is a lock. My first love is Christian McCaffrey. I had him a hair above Dalvin Cook, but like could have gone either way there. It's a tough matchup with the Saints, but they're really banged up defensively right now. They've got some injuries along defensive line and Marcus Davenport. Their secondary is a little banged up too. And McCaffrey's workload is disgusting. He scored 23 FanDuel points last week without a touchdown. How? Like how? What? There is value elsewhere via the other running back. So I do like McCaffrey quite a bit. My second love is Chris Carson for tournaments. I don't like him for cash games, so I think Eckler's cash or passing game workload is more locked in. With Carson, I think it's a good way to get access to a fun game. He has a solid ceiling, whether the Titans keep pace or not. The team didn't run a ton of plays last week, which is why Carson's role may seem muted, but he ran around an 18 to 26 dropbacks in week 1, had a good chunk of the early down work. Now there's no Rashad Penny. Are you really going to use DJ Dallas, Travis Homer, Alex Collins? Not as much. So I think that for $6,700, Chris Carson makes a lot of sense. The one guy we have not talked about yet, who I kind of think is pretty fun, is David Montgomery. He is at home against the Bengals. I don't mind that game for mini stacks, like a Montgomery with T. Higgins, Montgomery with Jamar Chase, some other stuff like that. So would also mention David Montgomery at $7,300 as being a guy. Joe Mixon too, 78 in that same game. I think those guys are worth mentioning, even though they will not be as core-ish as the other running backs. Let's move now to wide receiver. Who you got there?
So I almost went against what I said with the quarterback trends and talked about Josh Allen, just because I think he could easily be the one guy who people deviate from after what we saw in week 1. I'm not going to get there very often. You mentioned the win concerns, so we got to keep an eye out there. But one way to get some exposure to Josh Allen is just to play Stephon Diggs. I don't think either of us are talking about like Amari Cooper, Keenan Allen, but they're obvious. I think that's implied that we love them. but we are looking at ways to get lower exposure or lower, like less popular receivers. So Stephon Diggs is one of them for me at 7,500. Fifth in expected fantasy points based on his underlying workload, based on like a little model I run. Should have scored 20.1 FanDuel points, pad 11.4. He's the single largest regression candidate at the position on the main slate. And this game against Miami is rating out fourth in pace and fifth in average pass rate for me. My second love is Julio Jones at 6,300. We talk about this in golf, or at least I do a lot. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but when you talk about like cold streaks for golfers, it's either just a matter of time before they return to form, or it's the beginning of the end and they'll never be the same. Typically, it's just a matter of time before they bounce back a bit. And if Julio Jones bounces back to what Julio Jones can do, we're going to be kicking ourselves that we weren't heavier on him at 6,300 in a game against the Seahawks. 78% route rate, 6 targets, which was 17%. Saw an end zone target. So I'm back in on Julio Jones. He could easily be the highest like per dollar value if he puts up a Julio Jones game. And my third love is Jamar Chase, coming off a big game, so a little bit wary there, but I also had on in my notes to my future self not to overthink it with Jamar Chase. Other receivers are at similar salaries, so I don't feel like I have to play Jamar Chase much more than these other guys, but Chase led the Bengals in routes, had 7 targets for 101 yards and a touchdown. Had a 15.7 yard ADOT, so that high variance is something that I'm all about because you need more than just a high ADOT. You need the volume too, and so whenever you blend the two together, that's whenever you can get big games.
Yeah, I think that Chase is perfect. I also think Devontae Smith in that same range. That game's not too bad. So Devontae is up there. Didn't have him in my loves, but I would mention that he
Devontae
is
and Hurts is a very it's one of my favorite stacks this week.
Devontae Hurts running back with Debo. Let's ride. Or Kittle as well. I think those are pretty enticing. My first love at receiver is Justin Jefferson because he is a big play threat in a game that is a pretty high scoring environment. Last week, Jefferson had 9 targets and 2 of those were deep. Like he had a great role. He didn't convert as much as Thielen did. He's $7,300. Sweet. Like, give me Justin Jefferson. You can easily stack him. Like I've got here a McCaffrey lineup, which has Kyler, Nuke, and Jefferson. I can make that work. It's kind of tough, but I can make it work. My second one is CeeDee Lamb because $6,800 is too low for him. And if you ignore the volume last week, because they threw 58 times, if we pretend that's going to be lower this week, which it might not be for them, Lamb had 26% of the overall targets. He had 40% deep, 22% in the red zone. I want to get to Amari too, but I love this number on CeeDee Lamb at $6,800. So I think he's tremendous. That's not under the radar, but like, who cares? My third love is in that same game, Mike Williams. He had an amazing role in week 1. But we didn't notice because that game was bad. Williams had 12 targets. 1 of those was deep. 2 were in the red zone. And he only had 1 deep target, but had 4 intermediate targets that were still kind of downfield. He had a 9.6 yard ADOT, which is low for him, but the shorter targets jack up his floor, and he can still get downfield looks. So he still has a path to a great ceiling. I think he had like 80-something yards in week number 1, $5,600. Mike Williams, which has never gone poorly before, gonna be a core play for me. What could possibly go wrong? But again, it's not really Mike Williams. It's Mike Williams, different situation.
I like Mike Williams too. 82 yards, 115 air yards, 26% of the targets.
Yeah, I think he's great. Let's move now to tight end. Who do you have there?
I have Darren Waller at 7,000. He's got wide receiver usage, which is the case for some of these elite tight ends. And on this slate, it's really George Kittle, who I believe actually blocked a lot on pass routes. The sample is small there, but that's something to keep an eye on. So I think Darren Waller is the only guy who, well, not the only guy because George Kittle can do it with a few catches because his run after catch is crazy. But Darren Waller's the guy who can demolish this slate at tight end. 34% of the targets on Monday night, 38% of the air yards. They just got on the ball. It felt like the offense was Darren Waller. John Gruden is going nuts over Darren Waller. So I'm gonna play a lot of Darren Waller this week. And I think the case you can make for him very easily is salary wise, Darren Waller plus Jamar Chase, Devontae Smith, Mike Williams. The kind of flip side of that is like a DK Metcalf, AJ Brown, Justin Jefferson, plus Jared Cook, Kyle Pitts, Tyler Higbee. both are viable to me. If I'm building one lineup, I think the more appealing option is Waller plus like a Mike Williams or something.
I agree. I think that is a good play this week. The one downside with Waller is that if they don't play well, given that they had an emotional game on a Monday night, traveling to the East Coast to face a good team, that's the one down path. But like, he'll still get 10 targets. So who cares?
And then I have Tyler Higbee, 5,600. Played every snap in week 1, ran 93% of the routes, third among tight ends in target share, 23% on a lower passing volume from the Rams. But I tweeted about this, which I know is funny. But the Rams were really aggressive on first down, and I like to see that for a tight end.
Where do you sit on Darrell Henderson? $6,400. Really good roll last week. I think that game's okay. Like it's not. The Colts are very slow. It seems like, and that's super annoying. But the Rams are fast. Henderson had a great roll. The Colts defense didn't play as well in week 1 as it did last year. So Henderson, I feel like we probably should be talking a bit more about at $6,400.
Yeah, I'm not out on him by any means, but he's not going to be someone I build around. And for you yourself, if you're playing 100% Najee, I don't know how often you get there. He's a consideration, but the reason I love DFS is that I don't have to roster anyone who doesn't have, like, I don't have to play a Miles Sanders who might just be like the 1A in a committee. We don't know what it is with Henderson.
I mean, he played 96% of the snaps, so I think I feel better about him than Miles Sanders.
Yes, I was ramping into something. Week 1 says he's the clear one. Bringing in Sonny Michel and understanding he's probably going to get more of a workload puts that more into question. With Najee, we don't have that, so some Henderson, but not a ton.
The Sonny Michel trade was like 6 years ago. He's had time. Come on, he's had time to ramp up. I think Henderson's
under 85% snap rate for Henderson.
Well, I mean, variance suggests he'll be under because like there are a lot of paths to an under.
75% over under.
Over. Okay. You want to bet?
No.
Alas. My first 11 tight end. I don't know how we got there. Oh, I asked about it. That's why. Also, Jonathan Taylor's not terrible. I think that Taylor, the guys I would say I'd like to rotate in as like my secondary plays are Mixon, Montgomery, Taylor, and Henderson.
It's going to be a long list.
Yeah.
We haven't mentioned Alvin Kamara's name.
Who? He's wearing a NASCAR visor during pregame warmups last week. He's the best. My first love is Kyle Pitts. Pitts, just 31 yards in week 1, but really good usage. He had 8 targets. 2 of those were deep. 1 was in the red zone. He ran a route either out wide or in the slot on 25 of his 30 routes. That's awesome. So Kyle Pitts, despite a bad environment, still a really good play for DFS. My second one was Jared Cook, another route for lower salaried exposure to my favorite game this week. He had 8 targets in week 1, and 5 of them were at least 10 yards downfield. He had 2 targets in the red zone. He's $5,400. I was not on Jared Cook for season long. I was worried about if he would have the same role he had at the Saints. It appears he does not. So Jared Cook back in our collective conscience for week number 2. Let's move to defense. Brandon, who do you have there?
I have Chicago at 4,100 simply because I want games where there's some like offensive pulse. Joe Burrow took a sack on a league high 15.6% of his dropbacks in week 1. Pro Football Focus has the Bears with the 3rd best defensive line matchup in terms of like pressure rate by comparison. I'll use them, but only in lineups where I don't have the Bengals. And I think the Browns are going to be mega chalk based on what I'm seeing with projections at 4,200. So a little bit of a pivot away there.
For a cash game, I'm fine going Browns. I think that's totally okay. I actually took the same line of thought for my defense as I want games of the pulse. I actually don't mind exposure to Seattle's defense against Tennessee. And I love stacking this game. Very cool with it. But Seattle's defense has upside. They had a 32% pressure rate in week number 1. Ryan Tannehill had the 2nd highest sack rate of the week. He also, in his passes, had sack-like tendencies, which is a weird phrase. But the Seahawks, $3,700, they are home favorites. I'm not going to overlap with Titans guys, as you said, but when I'm not there, I'm okay going Seattle. I'm also okay with the Chargers. I love the Cowboys, but this defense could be pretty good. It's going to be a heavy drop back game for Dak. No Lyle Collins. So in the lines where I don't have Cowboys, I can go Chargers. In the lines where I don't have Titans, I can go Seahawks. But then also others to consider to me. I think that I won't do that one. I thought about it. I'll go. I think the Browns are a team to consider. I think the Saints are definitely a team to consider, despite their defensive injuries. Cardinals are a team to consider as well. You've got good options to consider. But for tournaments, I think that exposure to the Seahawks and the Chargers is wise, despite how much I like those two games. That is all that we have for this week. Brandon, any final thoughts for you before we close up shop and send people off to fill out their lineups?
The thing that really stood out to me by the end of this was that we love a few games and not necessarily have interest in a lot of other games, which is fine. But the one thing that really, really stuck out to me was that running back list of guys we were considering really was getting longer, and it's hard to, even at running back where things are more predictable, it's hard to play like 15% of everyone. So I have my work cut out for me with who I'm going to narrow down, but my three loves I still feel great about for sure.
I do too. I like all three of yours, and Chris Carson was the addition on mine, and Dalvin Cook, or Christian McCaffrey, I should say. So we'll see how things shake out. I'll have to whittle things down eventually, but there's a strong consideration set of guys I feel really good about for this week. Other thing I'd mention is don't forget the Listener League, FanDuel.com/league/Listener League, $5 entry, 3 entries max. There is no rake. So if you want to play DFS smartly, play no rake contest, you get one here. FanDuel.com/league/Listener League. If you want some more NFL discussion, we have a Thursday Night Football preview coming up on the FanDuel YouTube, Twitch, Facebook, and Twitter pages on Thursday, 4 p.m. Myself and Olivia Moody of Volume Sports. Brandon and JJ and I will be here on Friday at 4 p.m. with our weekly snake draft. Brandon or JJ's Q&A at noon on Sunday as well on the FanDuel YouTube, Twitch, Facebook, and Twitter pages. So make sure you're subscribed there. Also subscribe to the numberFire Daily Fantasy Podcast feed wherever you get your podcast. UFC, NASCAR, PGA, MLB, everything is right there. Eventually NBA coming back as well. So make sure you hit it up. Subscribe to the numberFire Daily Fantasy Podcast feed wherever you get your podcasts. And if you like what you hear, leave us a rating and review as well. Brandon, if people have questions for you on Twitter, where can they find you there?
I'm at Gadula13, GDULA13.
And I am at Jim Sannes, JIMSANNES. You can also follow the FanDuel Podcast Network at FanDuel Podcast. Big thank you to everyone for tuning in for this week. Good luck to you in week 2. We'll talk to you once again next week. This has been the Heat Check Fantasy Podcast powered by numberFire.